Okay, Jake, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you so you can get started. Again, thank you everybody for being here tonight. Jake Brinkman is an ecologist with the Indianapolis Office of Land Stewardship. He assists with natural resource management and planning for woodland, wetland, and riparian habitats in Indianapolis parks. Jacob has also worked with IDEM, the Nature Conservancy, and as a naturalist at Eagle Creek Park. He graduated from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs in 2004. Jake, welcome so much. We're so appreciative for you taking the time tonight. And I know that it's been on my list for quite some time for understanding the work of Indy's Land Stewardship Department better and how we can all get more involved. So with that, I am going to turn off my camera, turn off my mic. I'll ask everybody tonight during Jake's presentation, please feel free to enter questions in the chat. We will do Q&A at the end of the presentation. If there are any clarifications needed, then I will go ahead and just quickly interrupt you, Jake, and ask for that clarification. Otherwise, we'll just hold questions until the end of the presentation, but feel free to be listing them in the chat. With that, Jake, I'm going to turn off my video and turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brooke. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I have the highest respect for the Indiana Native Plant Society and all the knowledge you share, as well as the communities you serve and raising awareness about the benefits of native plants. So it means a lot to be here tonight. And I'm Jake Brinkman. I'm an ecologist with the City of Indianapolis Department of Public Works, and we manage and restore natural areas throughout Indianapolis and Indianapolis parks. And that entails a lot of different types of work, from conservation to ecological restoration, native plantings, and invasive species control. And I'm going to try and bundle that up as best I can to describe this work and why it's so important, not just for Indianapolis, but how this work is done throughout the state with other partners and similar agencies. But I am very grateful for this opportunity. So I'm with the Land Stewardship Office, and this year we're actually celebrating our 30th year. Two of my colleagues, Don Miller and Brenda Howard, have been doing this a very long time. Some of you may know them. They've been involved with INPS and helping facilitate work days and garlic mustard pulls and other invasive removal projects for many years. And there's a lot of that activity here in Indianapolis with the Indiana Native Plant Society. So we appreciate all the help we get on the properties we manage. I'm trying to advance my slides here. I don't know if it requires a different button than I'm used to. It's not wanting to advance. Maybe there's a little button. Let's try that. There we go.
There you go. Everybody hear? Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure I'm not too quiet or too loud.
I think you're perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to start with the mission of land stewardship, and that's simply to protect and manage natural habitats for people, wildlife, clean air and clean water. Our vision is to protect, manage, restore, and expand natural areas in Indianapolis to increase ecological services, improve the natural landscape for wildlife and passive recreation, and foster a conservation ethic. And if we look at Marion County, you can see that the blue areas are the areas we work in, and those are the managed areas for land stewardship. The green are the park boundaries. So you can see Eagle Creek Park in the northwest part of the county. That's going to be our largest woodland habitat and largest property that we are involved with management of. There's also Southwest Way, kind of near the bottom. That's our second largest city park in Marion County. But this also includes pretty well-known locations like Murat Park, Murat Woods Nature Preserve, Holiday Park, Town Run Park, and Grassy Creek on the east side. So these are all places that we work and are involved with ecological restoration. It is comprised of about 2,000 acres throughout our park system at 37 different park locations. That includes 4 state dedicated nature preserves, which are Murat Woods, Eagles Crest, Spring Pond Nature Preserve, and Woolens Gardens on the east side off of 56th and Shadeland. These are very important habitats. They include habitat for rare, threatened, and endangered species, and we're managing dozens of different invasive species on these properties. There are some that are very widespread and found throughout the whole county, and then there's others that we only have at 1 or 2 properties. And we treat those based on a priority list and our conservation management plans, which are site-specific for each of the parks that we work. So you can see Indianapolis is a very developed landscape. There has been a lot of historical and prior land use that has influenced the plant communities that are still out around today. Many of those have varying degrees of disturbance and altered hydrology, which can harm the ecological integrity of those natural systems. So a lot of that habitat loss has come from development pressure, building the city out, more commercial and residential development, as well as our history with agriculture and clearing land for livestock grazing, as well as timber harvest. So it's quite different than it was pre-settlement conditions, but many of the properties we work in offer a glimpse into what those areas look like 200 or more years ago. And a few of them haven't changed very much within that time. We don't have a lot of virgin timber or old growth woods locally, but we do have a lot of old second growth. And in those instances, the land wasn't completely cleared or the soil wasn't disturbed significantly, and it has allowed the native plant community to recover and regenerate, which is definitely what we want to see in the places that we work. So our managed habitats here in Indianapolis include 1,500 acres of woodlands, 46 acres of wetlands. We have over 100 acres of reforestation, where we're planting trees to become future forest. We have over 300 acres of planted prairies. Now, prairie is not a native habitat to this part of the state here in Marion County. So it's kind of a transitional habitat, but it's wonderful for pollinator support and all the ecological benefits. And we tend to view it as more of a transitional habitat, and it'll ultimately become forest again. Everything around here wants to grow up in trees anyway. So it is a challenge to manage prairie habitats locally, but when they're maintained, they do really well and they provide numerous benefits. We also have early successional habitats and green infrastructure rain gardens in more urban parts of the city that filter stormwater and reduce pollution. So our highest quality habitats locally are going to be our state dedicated nature preserves, and we're very fortunate to have these properties within our system. They are part of the park property, but they do have articles of dedication from the Department of Natural Resources that provide more protections for the habitat and preventing any collection of plant or wildlife specimens. Eagles Crest Nature Preserve, maybe one you're familiar with, at nearly 300 acres. It's going to be about our highest quality forest within the county. Mesic upland forest, dominated by oaks and sugar maples, as well as hickory forest. We have a lot of rare plants within this nature preserve, as well as a new sustainable trail, the West Side Trail at Eagle Creek Park, which will be open to the public later this year. And the trail is complete. We're just adding parking at various locations on the west side to allow some controlled access. Spring Pond Nature Preserve is another preserve at Eagle Creek Park, but it's a completely different habitat type. This is going to be central till plain flatwoods specifically the Tipton till plain flatwoods. And these are poorly drained soils, mostly heavy clay. They don't allow a lot of drainage like our upland soils do, but they have a different plant community. And these properties are also very significant for the amphibian habitat they provide, as well as for birds and other wildlife and pollinators. So these are very important habitats, and we have been actively managing these sites for many years. At Spring Pond Nature Preserve, one of the challenges has been gaps in the canopy from the dieback of the ash trees suffered from the emerald ash borer. And I'm sure that's a situation that many of you have experienced in your own communities, and it's a big change. It is a disturbance to the habitat. It sets us back with our ecological restoration goals. And those gaps in the canopy have allowed more sunlight to reach the forest floor, which tends to favor invasive species coming in. And that adds an additional strain on the community and more of a challenge from a management perspective. So if we zoom out a little bit and we look at Indiana as a whole, you'll see these are the main ecoregions throughout the state. So Indiana has a rich natural heritage and represents sort of an ecological crossroads with the northern lakeshore and the dune communities going all the way down south to the upland forests and knobs of southern Indiana, everything in between. The once magnificent Grand Kankakee Marsh was one of the largest wetland ecosystems in North America before it was altered and drained or channelized, resulting in the loss of many of those natural communities by the early 1920s. So our ecoregions in Indiana are going to be defined by the climate, soils, geology, and plants and wildlife. Marion County, again, is within the Central Till Plain, and this is going to be defined by a mostly flat landscape that has been created from glaciers depositing large amounts of till, and where melting ice has also left small hills and ridges with gentle slopes. But for the most part, Central Indiana is going to be flat and has allowed us to have some really excellent agricultural land as well. This is from the Department of Natural Resources, and this describes some of those natural communities of Indiana. And you can see on that list, the Central Till Plain Flatwoods is on there that we discussed, as well as our mesic forests and floodplain forests. And we have examples of those throughout Indianapolis and elsewhere in Indiana. But some of those habitats are considered globally rare and significant. So that only adds more value to the work that we're doing, and recognizing that these are important places that are part of our heritage in Indiana and provide innate benefits that warrant their protection. So here's a great quote from E.O. Wilson. Many of you may know who that is, but biological diversity is the key to the maintenance of the world as we know it. And one alarming statistic I read recently is that wildlife abundance on Earth decreased as much as 58% between 1970 and 2012. So in about a 50-year span or less, then we've lost over half of the wildlife abundance on planet Earth. And that's a troubling statistic for me. I've seen some of the decline in our habitats just locally in the past several years with the effects of the emerald ash borer. Along with that loss has come a decline in our pollinator species as well. So 80% of plants rely on insects for pollination, and their decline causes a ripple effect through food chains. And the monarch butterfly is on here, and it's now classified as an endangered species. And we believe that the population of the monarchs have declined as much as 90% in just the last 20 years. So that's been a very sudden and precipitous decline for them, as well as other pollinators like solitary bees, moths, and colony dwelling bees. So they're all feeling pressure from a variety of different factors, but mostly habitat loss and invasive species. Those are like the biggest threats. Here in Marion County, we have many different endangered species, and all of the ones listed here that have an asterisk are ones that have been observed or recorded on properties where we work. So things like birds like the American bittern, black-crowned night heron, cerulean warbler, those are all in trouble, but they do exist here in Indianapolis. They've learned to live within an urban environment. And of course, there are many threats that are causing their numbers to go down, but the properties where we work are a refuge for these endangered or rare species. And many of them are specifically conservation targets at the properties where we work and manage. The rusty patch bumblebee is a new and exciting species that we've learned about in recent years that has been documented here in Marion County. I've never seen one, but I'd like to think that they're out there somewhere in the prairies and grassland habitats that we help manage. The Kirtland snake is another one that many people don't know about, and it's a small snake that we have at one of our flatwoods restoration projects. And through years of herpetofauna surveys, we've captured them and documented them and released them just so we have a good sense of their activity on site. And we were able to find out in recent years that they're even dispersing on site, which is unusual. There is a link on here to the DNR's full list of endangered, threatened, and rare species for Indiana. And you can also look it up specifically by county on their website. So please check that out if you haven't seen that site. Indiana bat's another species that I know we have on our properties, but I haven't seen, and we don't have a lot of evidence, but they have been found nearby at Sodalis Park, not far from here in Hendricks County. Looks like we do have one question in the chat. I'm going to see. Okay, you left a link to that. Excellent. So what are some of these threats to biodiversity? It's not any one thing that's causing their decline, but it's several factors, mostly related to habitat loss and invasive species. And I know this is kind of text heavy, so you can just kind of gloss over that, but habitat loss comes in the form of land clearing, clear-cut logging, development, building roads, sites that were formerly in agriculture. They may not still be farmed today, but that impact has already occurred. The loss of that community has happened. Depending on the disturbance to the soil, those sites may be able to recover. Others may have so much damage to the hydrology that they may not function the same, especially where field tile was installed. So at one of our sites, one of the things we have done to restore hydrology is to disrupt or break the field tile and help that hydrology return to the site. Erosion, pollution, plant diseases, and pests, as well as climate-related impacts, can also undermine species survival. And then following habitat loss, the next biggest threat to biodiversity is going to be invasive species. And quite simply, they degrade habitats by outcompeting the native plant community. They are difficult to control once they get established in a particular area. They can escape cultivation. Many of them came here because they were aesthetically pleasing. They were considered important for ornamental or beautification purposes. In some cases, they were planted deliberately for erosion control and wildlife habitat. So we're trying to undo some of those past mistakes from other generations that didn't know any better and didn't realize the extent that those plants could spread and displace our native species. And only compounding that problem is birds will often eat the fruits of many of those, from calorie pear fruits to Japanese barberry or Oriental bittersweet and others like burning bush, only making it more difficult to get adequate control and emphasizing the need to act quickly. So This just explains a little more about the exact problem with invasive species. So if we look kind of at the bigger picture, invasives cost our country over $120 billion in damages every year, and they've infested over 100 million acres across the US. That's an area roughly the size of California. So that's a big problem that invasives have that big of a hold on our beautiful parks and natural resources throughout the country. They can negatively affect property values, agricultural productivity, aquatic resources, outdoor recreation, and ecosystem health. And one of the ways they do that is by destroying habitat for those rare plants and wildlife we mentioned, and even threatening 2/3 of all endangered species. So the way that we do invasive plant control may be a little different than what some of you are experienced with. Maybe some of this is also familiar. We do a lot of mechanical removal. We have professional ecological restoration contractors that do a lot of the ground work for us. We're very fortunate to have Ecologic doing a lot of this work for the city of Indianapolis. They are very experienced, and they have crews that come up here in our parks every day, controlling invasives, maintaining native plantings, and also reporting and helping with the monitoring and evaluation of those properties. But the FECON machine is what you see in the top right picture, and that is going to be most effective in areas with dense infestations of invasive trees and shrubs. It just grinds everything down to the ground, like hitting the reset button on the understory. It can be a shock to see an area that's been cleared with a FECON machine, but a skilled operator can use that equipment around the native trees, the things that you want to protect and leave in that habitat. And then you allow the natural regeneration to take place. And over time, that's going to require some follow-up treatment, whether you're spraying resprouts following the clearing, or going in there and adding seed, native seed at the right time. The FECON machine leaves a coarse mulch behind, so that's going to help suppress the growth of other invasives, but it also makes it hard for the natural regeneration to happen right away. So sometimes it's 2 to 3 years before you can really go back and plant in those areas. Chemical control is another essential tool in our toolbox for restoration. That involves the use of herbicide, and that can come in the form of cut stump treatment, which is very targeted, or foliar application for larger patches. Especially certain species are very sensitive to glyphosate treatment. And if you target them at the right time of year, then you're going to see more effective treatment. Basal bark treatment, or BBT, is another treatment that we do certain times of year. And that's just an oil-based herbicide that you apply directly to the outside of the bark. You can also do a method called hack and squirt, or girdle the tree with a chainsaw and then put the herbicide in there where it's going to be taken up by the tree or plant that you have applied it to. We do use selective herbicide some of the time, and non-selective herbicide depending on what the target species is. And many of these dense infestations do require annual treatment or follow-up treatment to reduce that pressure over time. So it is a long game for us. We go back to the same sites year after year. Sometimes we work in different areas. Sometimes we go back to the same area and keep trying to get it back under control, or to the conditions that we would like to see. We do prioritize management of what we call early detection, rapid response species. These are high priority invasives. Some of them are newer in this area. Other ones are just very problematic and spread very quickly, like our swallowwort, stiltgrass, and some of the others. Kudzu would be one we don't have here in Marion County yet, and hopefully we can keep it away, but we've all seen how bad that can get in the south and along the Appalachian region. I've seen entire hillsides completely covered with kudzu where it grows on top of the trees, and that's kind of a nightmare scenario. And we do have other species though that are very difficult to control here. On the bottom picture, you see purple winter creeper, which has a waxy cuticle on the leaf that makes it difficult for the herbicide to penetrate. So sometimes we have to add a methylated seed oil to get good penetration with the herbicide. But we typically do either the backpack spraying for the herbicide, or sometimes they use like a RTV and they'll go with a tank sprayer in really dense patches. Here are some of the challenges to effective control. So things that just make our job harder. The lack of public awareness about invasive species. A lot of people don't realize the threat until it passes that threshold of being either too late or having a full-blown problem. I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. If you look at that graphic, it just shows when people first realize there's a problem. It's often, you know, spread significantly, and you may have multiple patches or large populations on nearby land that are uncontrolled. One thing that is still occurring is the continued sale of invasive plants at nurseries and garden centers. So we always recommend that people plant native, grow native. The Indiana Native Plant Society has a lot of great resources about native plants and where to find native plants here in Indiana. But do demand your local garden centers and nurseries carry native plants if you haven't already. Climate change is another factor that makes our work even harder. Here we see a picture of remnant woods that has become invaded by what looks like to be Amur honeysuckle. And honeysuckle can grow 15 to 20 feet tall, or in some cases a little higher. And it shades out the understory, so you end up with much less diversity. And it even releases chemicals into the soil that suppress the growth of native plants and other species around it. And that results in bare soil conditions. So not only do we have our habitat being undermined by these invasive species, but it's also contributing to greater soil erosion and stormwater runoff when we have heavy rain events because of that soil that's not held in place with strong root systems. Here's a common scene in Indianapolis parks and probably elsewhere throughout the state. There's a lot of honeysuckle and burning bush and privet here dominating the understory. You can see it's fall. Many of the trees, the native trees, have begun to senesce and they're already dropping their leaves, but the invasive understory is still green and growing strong. So a lot of invasives are on just a different calendar or time frame as far as their life cycle. They tend to leaf out early in the spring before many of our native plants. They also retain their leaves late into the fall. So it helps us for identifying them, of course, in those kind of transitional seasons, but it's just working very rapidly to overtake these areas and shade out the native community that was there before. Like I said, we manage over 70 different species of invasive plants here in Indianapolis, including Amur honeysuckle, winter creeper, burning bush, bittersweet, and then the lower left picture has sweet autumn clematis, which is a newer species, like in the last 5 years, has really become kind of a full-blown problem in some locations. If you ever see that in someone's landscaping, please do us all a favor and tell them that that's a really awful invasive species that should be controlled, pulled, removed. But there are many native alternatives that have similar growth habits and characteristics that, like our native virgensbauer, that could be planted instead if you can find that. So if we look at what's going on throughout the state of Indiana, there are important efforts that have been made, and through the help of the IIC and the IAC, the terrestrial plant rule was adopted, and that designates 44 species of plants as invasive, and it's now illegal to sell or trade them throughout Indiana, and they are not even supposed to be transported. So that's the DNR's Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology that has authority over those cases, but if you do see a garden center or nursery that is still carrying invasive species, please tell them that those plants are not allowed to be sold because of the harm that they cause. And that's how many of them end up in our natural habitats and parks, is from escaping cultivation. People still have a lot of invasive species in their landscaping, but slowly people are catching on and realizing that they can be replaced with many suitable native alternatives. And we have a whole list of those on our website that we can share. But there are native plants for all sun and soil conditions on your property, I guarantee it. So if you have any questions, you can ask me at the end, or I'll put my email up so you can follow up with any other questions you may have. The Indiana Invasive Species Council has done a lot of great work to raise awareness about invasives. I also work with the State of Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management, or SICM. They used to be Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management, but now they are working to establish SISMAs in all 92 counties throughout Indiana. They also have regional specialists that are there to provide technical assistance and expertise about conservation and native plants and invasive species. So please look up their website. They have a lot of great resources as well. And like I said, those SISMA groups are forming throughout the state. They do awesome work. They also organize and hold weed wrangles. I don't know if you've participated in a weed wrangle before, but that's a great way to get together and work together as a team to remove invasives and keep going back to those same places to really make a difference over time. Here are some strategies for natural area management. And I'm going to just try to breeze through these. One of the terms we talk a lot about in our work is adaptive management, and that's just being willing to modify the plan as needed based on current information and monitoring of these sites. We learn what works and what doesn't. How do we refine this process to make our work more effective and efficient? So starting out, before we go to a site for the first time, we want to do a baseline survey or inventory to know what's there. But again, many of the properties we've been working for over 2 decades and have a pretty good handle or program in place at those sites. We do take on new parcels from time to time, depending on what the priority is for other managers in the city, and we have sometimes had to go in places that were just completely full of mature honeysuckle, where we're using the FECON machine, but we've made great progress in just a few years' time. Places like Barton Park, where we've kind of gone back after a few years of minimal management to really engaging and working with the neighborhood there and getting some grant funds to further our work at that property. Now, with invasive species control, of course, you want to select the appropriate herbicide for the target species. That's very important. It's not just any herbicide works for an invasive plant. You got to use the right herbicide, right formulation at the right rate, and ideally at the right time of year. And if you go to that SICM website I was telling you about, they have an excellent calendar of control that lists all the different species, like you see on this list, and when's the best time to target them, and with what chemical and what percent of that chemical or the active ingredient is going to be the most effective. So please check out that resource if you haven't seen that. Once we have greater control on the invasives on a particular property, we do like to plant native species in there and enhance the existing habitat, or in some cases, put back what's been lost. We use as many different species as possible, and that's often a mix of grasses, sedges, and wildflowers for the understory or the herbaceous layer. And then we do woody trees and shrubs, native species, of course, for future canopy and for the different layers of habitat. And we like to seed during the dormant season. We've had the best success. Many of our native species like that period of cold stratification or wet stratification where they're out exposed in the elements. That helps activate the germination for the following growing season. And I can't emphasize this enough, but maintenance is key. You can't just plant something and walk away from it. You got to go back and take care of it, whether that's trees, shrubs, or wildflowers. They have to be watered. We need to weed them. In some cases, we have to cage them or prune them for deer exclosures or reducing herbivory that takes place. Some of our pollinator plantings, we have to mow them on a regular basis to control the annual weeds that would come up. If we didn't mow them, then they would quickly just get overrun by things like teasel, thistle, or other species that we don't want growing there. And our strategy is always to monitor and evaluate. We go back to these same properties over and over, and we have tried something in recent years called broad level mapping, which has been a game changer for our program. And with that, we're mapping the density and the distribution of invasive species. I'll show you an example here in just a little bit of what that looks like. And through that process, we're also rating the natural area zones, as well as the habitat and buffer value, and then identifying the stewardship priorities. Sometimes those are going to stay the same for many years. Other times, through that adaptive management practice, we're going to update and change those stewardship priorities based on what's happening on site. We also do many biological surveys through partners or contractors, and that includes bird surveys, herpetological surveys. We've done vegetation surveys, and that just helps us know what we're protecting. We have to know what's out there before we can really do much to protect it. And we need to know not just what's out there, but where it is, what are some of the trends in their behavior, or where are we finding certain species, where do we know certain species are located, and what are the best ways to protect them. And I mentioned this before, but we also have the early detection rapid response protocol for invasive species that are a high priority, ones that can spread very quickly, and ones that we don't want to see ever in our parks. GPS tracking is another tool that our contractors provide. So anywhere they've been to do work, they're wearing a GPS unit, and then we get a geodatabase every month that tells us where they've been, what they're doing. We can go back in GIS and look at those tracks, so we know if there was a spot that was missed to send them back there, or if we just have follow-up questions about what was done on a particular day. Another really important tool is GIS, and we often look at historical aerial imagery to all the way back to 1937 that show us what Indianapolis looked like 80 or more years ago. So that's really helpful to tell us about that prior land use, where there was a history of agriculture or grazing, as well as a homestead or clearing for timber. And I'll show an example of that as well. The Indiana Heritage Database is important. I want to mention that we do submit records periodically of known endangered, threatened, or rare species where we have found them on our properties, and we send that with a GIS information to the State Department of Natural Resources, who maintains that data. Now, I was talking about the GIS historical aerials. Here you can see this is Eagle Creek Park from 1941 on the left, and today on the right. And what I have marked in the red polygons are forest remnants or relic woods that have managed to kind of exist undisturbed for at least 70 or more years throughout the city, and that's rare. So those are going to be our high priority areas to go in and protect, because they have had the least amount of disturbance. They should have the highest quality habitats and communities represented. So Spring Pond, you do see that dark, dense block of woods on the kind of lower right side of the picture. And then Eagles Crest Nature Preserve is on the northwest side of Eagle Creek Park. And that's our largest intact urban forest in Marion County. Spring Pond Nature Preserve is our largest example of about 43 acres, I want to say, of a flatwoods community. There are some other areas that you see outside of the park property that are privately owned and therefore unprotected unless they have a conservation easement. So 85% of the city's forest land is on private property. So that's a big concern to me. We have to be thinking about how to protect that land, working with landowners to either manage their land or put it in a conservation easement if they have significant habitat. There is a forest certification program through the DNR for 10 or more acre properties, but that's pretty uncommon here in Indianapolis. There are several, though, that we have our eyes on and would love to see become park property one day so the public can go and have access to these special areas. And so we can begin either restoration or other conservation work. Here we see an example of our broad level mapping. This is also at Eagle Creek Park at the Scott Starling Nature Sanctuary. This is on the north side of Eagle Creek Park, very close to where Eagle Creek, the river, comes into the reservoir. And this location has some rare habitat and community types, including a fen wetland, and it's been one of our most successful wetland restoration projects in land stewardship. So if you look closely, I know the font's kind of small, you can see the gradient that shows the approximate density of species like Amur honeysuckle, or even individual locations of invasive trees like Callery pear, white mulberry, European black alder. That's another one that's really been a problem in our wetland areas, as well as Norway maple. This is a similar map of the same place, but this shows other invasive shrubs like autumn olive, privet, multiflora rose, and burning bush, as well as European cranberry bush. And that's a type of viburnum that is beautiful, but highly invasive in wetland habitats. Those broad level mapping reports do guide management. So our restoration crews will go follow these maps using an Avenza program and GIS applications to be able to go specifically to a targeted site and control either a group of invasive plants or sometimes just one invasive species that's in an area that needs control. That mapping allows monitoring and progress at those sites. So here you can see at Skiles Test Nature Park, which is on the east side of Indianapolis off 465 and around 56th Street. You see Skiles Test had a lot more honeysuckle than it does now. So just within 5 years, we've really turned back the clock and eliminating a lot of that honeysuckle. There are still lots of invasives on site, but it's in much better condition overall through years of repeated management. And that reduces the overall invasives pressure on site. It allows us to do other restoration activity like reforestation. We've planted a lot of trees at Skiles Test in just the last few years as well. And that will become future canopy and a little bit of a noise barrier too, if you're in the park, kind of preventing a lot of the interstate sounds. So we have these mapping reports for. Absolutely, please.
I just figured out that they use different hatching in the two maps. So on the left, 80 to 100% Amur honeysuckle is actually slashed, whereas in the right, it's solid. So it looks like it's a progression, but it's not. If that makes sense. I'm looking at the parcel on the right-hand side of the map.
Yes. Yeah. And so what that is basically showing like where we've been concentrating our efforts. And a lot of that has been on the west side of the paved trail that kind of divides the park in two sections. It runs north and south, and there was a new paved trail that went in there. On the right side is mostly prairie and then the reforestation area. And so because they've concentrated management efforts on the west side, which is more the upland, ravine habitats, the higher quality forest, that's where we're making the biggest gains with the honeysuckle control. There are other invasives, of course, in there too that they're targeting. But on the right side, some of that honeysuckle may have grown up in areas that have not been getting as much control in recent years, but then that will become work in future years and more of a priority once we get the highest priority area under control.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted people to know, because at first I was like, wow, it looks like honeysuckle got worse in 2022, but they just used a different hatch type. What's the diagonal slats on the left is actually the same as the solid on the right. So
great.
I just wanted to make sure people realize that.
Yes, thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
But these mapping reports have been very useful for us from a management perspective, just knowing what's there in real time and how do we, plan accordingly and prioritize stewardship work. In addition to the invasives mapping, we're also mapping notable species, rare plants as well. So here at Holiday Park, which is a really wonderful example of our local forest types, and it's also along the White River and does a lot to protect the water quality there as well. We're seeing rare plants like ginseng, ninebark, native populations of ninebark, and even nannyberry viburnum. And through this broad level mapping process, we've documented nannyberry in our parks for the first time, and they were not previously known to be in the county, which is really pretty cool to me. We've also found it at Eagle Creek Park and another location on the east side, I think at Raymond Park. Now, we don't share this information with the public because there are plants like ginseng that are commercially valuable, and we don't want to reveal those locations, but it's always a treat to get to find a wild ginseng plant in our parks, and just know that, it requires a really high quality area to grow in upland soils as well. We also take note of other problems like illegal dumping or erosion concerns, and then we can share that with our team so that they can try to address that down the road. With any stewardship and restoration work, it's important to really put in the planning and look at these conservation considerations. We do prioritize the nature preserves because they're the best examples of our local habitats. Anywhere else that we have high quality habitats or old second growth woods, that's going to be a bigger priority for us to go back and keep those areas relatively clean. Look for new populations of either winter creeper or bittersweet and try to get those controlled early. The surrounding buffer habitat is also very important. We don't want just an isolated woodlot to be surrounded by honeysuckle. So the more we push out that buffer and allow for natural regeneration to take place, that's only going to protect that more interior portion of the woodland. And riparian corridors are important too, just for protecting water quality. Sediment's actually our #1 water pollutant in Indiana. And so we have a lot of runoff, and in many of our urban parks, we have degraded streams and riparian corridors that either were cleared like almost all the way up to the stream bank, or have just become dumping grounds, and there's riprap and other junk that's been left there over time. And so we are doing as much as we can to put native plants back in those areas, which of course have deep root systems and can filter out pollutants and slow runoff. Reforestation is also a really important habitat. It's going to eventually attract more wildlife, although a lot of birds like that transitional habitat and younger forests. They like different age classifications. So sometimes they respond well to that edge habitat, or in some cases, even a disturbance to the woods. But we have over 300 acres of reforestation within Indy Parks properties. Some of those are tree mitigation sites, and other ones we're doing on our own, just to put forest back where it was either formerly turf or an agricultural field because of all the benefits. So obviously trees provide cooling benefits, they filter stormwater, they store massive amounts of carbon, as well as the soil and another vegetation like our prairie plants too. So they all help make our city more sustainable and resilient to climate related impacts. Indiana has experienced climate change already. You know, we're having more extreme cycles of weather, more severe downpours and flooding in some cases, as well as prolonged drought in different times of the year. A lot of our increased precipitation is happening during the winter months. And when we're having milder temperatures, we're getting more rain in the winter months instead of snow. And that rain can cause more flooding and issues during the winter months because of that. Of course, protecting rare and endangered species should be a high priority from a conservation standpoint. We also try to balance the conservation needs as well as access to the places that we work. So it's one thing to protect a place, but you can't put a fence up around it and tell people they can't go in there for the most part. So we do try to provide sustainable access. And one of the ways we do that is through sustainable trails and other ways to provide more of a use for passive recreation, like hiking, bird watching, and nature observation. So we realize, of course, all the social benefits these properties provide for health and wellness, and we want to make these places accessible and places that the public can get to so they can experience those same benefits. Here's an example of reforestation where it was just an old farm field before, where it's now grown up in trees. Again, it does require a lot of maintenance to get it to that point where the trees are mature and tall enough that they can resist deer browse. And we will also be mowing in between rows of trees. Sometimes we're seeding native wildflowers and forbs in between those rows of trees as well, just to further enhance that habitat and reduce competition from invasives. I showed you a map of Scott Starling Nature Sanctuary earlier. Here is a side-by-side of the before and after. So you can see that was also a farm field. We had students go out and help plant plugs. And then it's now evolved into a really dynamic site with a really diverse community of native plants that's providing awesome pollinator benefits and stormwater and carbon sequestration benefits too. And a fin is a type of wetland. It's going to be defined by calcareous soils. And it's one of those that was on that list of globally rare or imperiled natural communities here in Indiana. Here's a Flatwoods wetland complex that we have. This is one of the restorations that we're also working on at Eagle Creek Park. And this is a 100-acre site that has a mosaic of different habitat types represented, from flatwoods, forest, to open wetlands, sedge meadow, and shrub thickets or shrub car habitat. And that's really a wonderful place for wildlife. There are so many birds and amphibians there. That's where we have the Kirtland snake, which is state endangered. It may have just been listed as federally endangered as well in the last year. So on the slide, you also see a picture of an American bittern blending in very well with the cattails, a box turtle, and I've seen several box turtles at this site, as well as other pollinators and unusual species. So it's a really beautiful place to get to walk. We're trying to install a wetland boardwalk here with educational signage that'll provide more access for the public. But in just the last 8 years, we've planted over 20,000 trees at this site. So it's a very big project and obviously requires a great deal of maintenance to see the type of habitat we want come through. We do have a number of pollinator plantings. Of course, these are grassland habitats, and like I said before, we convert old agricultural fields or turf grass to that pollinator habitat. Sometimes we've done cost share with U.S. Fish and Wildlife or the Department of Natural Resources to plant wetland plugs. These also require maintenance in the form of mowing, burning, and spraying, typically just spot spraying annual weeds. but we have successfully burned all of our pollinator plantings and prairie habitats in recent years. Ecologic also has a burn crew, so we're really lucky to have them help with that effort and come up with burn plans that we use to basically carry out the burn. And we have to monitor, of course, for the right conditions. The weather has to be just perfect to conduct a burn safely and for it to behave in the way that we would like to have the greatest benefit. We talked a little bit about the ecosystem services, just all the many benefits these natural areas provide, especially forested natural areas. 1 acre of forest can capture over 50,000 gallons of stormwater in a single rain event. And mature trees can absorb 10 pounds of air pollution every year and over a ton of carbon dioxide in its lifetime. These trees also help counter the extreme heat and like the urban heat island effect that we have in Indianapolis. In a forest, it can be as much as 10 degrees cooler than the surrounding ambient air temperature. So that's a big difference. And that's of note in a city or an urban environment too, where we have lower tree canopy in some neighborhoods. Sometimes the marginalized communities and underserved areas have less tree canopy. They have more developed landscape, more impervious landscape. So they're getting a lot more heat, and that's going to result in a greater incidence of heat-related illness and energy costs as well to cool people's homes. So we're trying to see canopy be spread equitably across the city. And of course, the social benefits that natural areas provide can't be overlooked. Some current research that we're involved with. I'm really honored to be a part of this Forests and Cities Network. This is a part of the New York City-based Natural Areas Conservancy, and they have a network of 17 member cities that are involved with forests and cities, and we're basically sharing data, comparing research, and working together to promote our forested natural areas in cities and all the benefits they provide. And with them, we have participated in a carbon study as well as a temperature study. And that temperature study indicated about how our urban forests across the country on average are lowering that temperature by up to 9 degrees or so on average. So that's a pretty significant study that we've been a part of recently. The carbon study showed that 1 acre of Indianapolis forest stores between 75 and 105 metric tons of carbon. So obviously our natural areas are very hard at work helping provide that resilience and carbon benefits, which we know carbon levels, atmospheric carbon dioxide is rising very quickly, and natural climate solutions can provide so much of the benefits through carbon or through conservation, restoration, and management. We can really achieve a lot of those climate goals. A big part of our work also involves community engagement. We have many volunteer work days throughout the year where we get together with partners and we work on invasive removal projects and sometimes tree plantings or other native plantings. Eagle Creek Park has the invasive species strike team, which meets monthly to remove invasive species in different parts of Eagle Creek Park. I also run our site stewards program, and that consists of volunteer stewards adopting a natural area and inspecting it monthly and reporting of any concerns like erosion or invasive plants or noteworthy wildlife that they encounter. Also issues like illegal dumping or suspicious behavior. We have some of that too in our parks. So this picture just shows Lily Day of Service volunteers helping out at one of our properties, moving honeysuckle. We got that entire south edge of that wood lot cleared, and that's a historic woodland there, also along the White River, that has a lot of really beautiful mature oaks and other hardwood trees. and it's in a lower income part of the city that needs more of those benefits. We also do landowner surveys, and this is in conjunction with the state of Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management. And that's basically visiting a property owner and helping them develop a management plan. If they have some significant natural area, we help document invasive species and help them understand what all would be involved to control them on their property. These are done throughout the state. So if you know anyone or you yourself have some acreage and you want to help come up with a management plan for your property, you can find out who to contact through the SICM website. The city of Indianapolis also has a native planting program as a way to encourage residents to have more native landscaping, and that's also done through our Office of Land Stewardship. My colleague Brenda Howard runs that program. And once you apply, we would come out and do a site visit, and we tell you what kind of condition the native planting is in and what maintenance we would recommend, or how to really encourage the native planting community and control invasives that are only going to threaten the success of the native plants. We have many terrific partners. Some include Marion County Soil and Water Conservation District, Reconnecting to Our Waterways, and Indiana Wildlife Federation. So find out who else in your community cares about conservation and reach out to them if you're not already connected, and see if they might be interested in getting involved. We have a number of work days every year removing invasives. And it's amazing to me how fired up these people are when we take them out to a property and show them a problem with invasive species, and they are so eager to help be a part of the solution. A lot of people are catching on about the threat invasives pose and how we can really make a difference on our own property and in the public properties that we help manage. But of course, I always say conservation must begin at home. So whatever you're willing to do on your own property makes a huge difference. What I recommend is just first in identifying what invasives you have on your property. Maybe there's some you're already aware of. Some may have been planted in your landscaping. Others could have come in on their own, but do a quick inventory, see what's there and what you'd like to get rid of. It can be overwhelming to consider taking something out all at once, so it doesn't have to be a drastic change, but just a feasible action that can be taken bit by bit, year by year, will result in a healthier, more functioning habitat in your own yard. So, of course, we recommend that you do replace invasives with native landscaping, and there's resources through the INPS webpage and other locations where you can find where to purchase native plants. Some places, like here in Indianapolis, we have annual plant sales for native plants. So try to find out where those are going to be in your community and add more natives to your yard where you have the space for them. And you'll be amazed at how many beneficial insects and pollinators show up almost immediately after getting those plants established. They find them. So if you plant it, they will come. That definitely resonates in our work. So again, the pollinator support and habitat for other wildlife like birds that depend on those other insect populations. We can't forget about the stormwater benefits. All our native plants tend to have deeper root systems that hold the soil in place and limit erosion. They can also improve soil health. And if you have trees and you're getting some shade and canopy on your property, that's going to have some cooling benefits as well that can help counter extreme heat. So one place I recommend you check out if you haven't already is the Homegrown National Park website. Many of you know who Doug Tallamy is, and he's an expert in this arena. So please look up that Homegrown National Park concept and do what you can to make your own national park in your backyard. I'm going to see if there's any other question I need to jump onto. What was the nannyberry known for? Okay, thanks for putting that other website. I'll come back to yes, the nannyberry was known in other surrounding counties. So we do know about nannyberry being in other parts of Indiana. We just didn't know about it here in Marion County. There weren't any records of it being here until we began this mapping effort. Thank you. I
Oh,
also
Jake,
wanted
thank
to,
you so much.
yeah,
That was a lot, but that is just great information. Thank you.
absolutely.
I wanted to ask you real quick, was that a pink turtle head I saw in one of those photos a little while back? With little pink
Yes, it
glasses?
was.
Beautiful. And does that like wet feet?
It does, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're planning
I-
it in a rain garden in Johnson County here pretty soon.
It'll
So
do excellent in a rain garden. Yeah, any kind of
okay,
rain garden
okay,
is perfect for that.
great,
I
great.
know it's past 8 o'clock and I don't want to run over, but I have like a couple more slides if that's okay to just
Oh,
breeze
okay.
through.
Yeah. Yep.
So I just wanted to mention that we do have a number of educational videos on our webpage. There's a link to our YouTube channel, or you can just look up Indy Land Stewardship YouTube. And these are educational about many different ecological topics. And that's all I have. So we can open it up to any other questions or discussion. If people want to stick around, I have some extra time, but I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jake. Why don't you go ahead and stop sharing now? I'm going to invite, excuse me, everybody who would like to turn on their camera and turn on their mic and take some questions while people are doing that and thinking about that. I have a few. You already talked about the nanny berry and the pink turtle head. You talked a little bit about maintaining Marion County prairie spaces. And you mentioned there's some burning going on. Are there a lot of complications with burning in an urban area, or is that something that we're pretty successful with these days?
We've had good success with it. We've burned at Southeast Way Park. We have burned at Eagle Creek Park, and we're of course intentionally selecting areas that are away from the interstate, but we also burn when the prevailing wind is going to carry wind away from roads, housing developments, and interstates. So there is a science behind selecting the right burn window. And in some years we've had to just skip burning activity altogether because we didn't have the window, or conditions change. You might plan for a burn, get all the way on site, and then the wind picks up and it's outside of the parameters for our burn plan, and we can't do it.
And am I correct in understanding, I think what you said and what I've seen a little bit in the Pacific Northwest, in that it's hard to maintain a prairie because the trees really want to move in and take over, and that historically, well before colonialism, indigenous people were already burning the prairies because they were such important sources for them of resources for food and materials and whatnot. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in Indiana, we really only have native prairie in extreme northwestern Indiana. And there's a whole complex of wetland and sand prairies that are very well drained. And it's a unique part of the state. If you haven't been to Kankakee Sands Restoration, it's a nature conservancy property. It's a beautiful site. They have reestablished native prairie by collecting seed from remnant prairies and old cemeteries and roadsides and railroads, and then using that in the restoration effort. But they have almost 8,000 acres now in that restoration, and it connects to other natural areas. So it's a beautiful macro site now, and they even have bison that have returned to the restoration. So pretty incredible.
That's amazing. Another question. Do we have a map of rain gardens in Marion County? You talked about the extensive complex of rain gardens throughout Marion County. Do we have a map to those? If somebody
I do have a map. I didn't put it in my slide show, but I can share that separately, and it encompasses about 150,000 square feet. And there's at least a dozen different sites, and then each site is made up of multiple cells. And that's something, again, Ecologic assists with the maintenance of. They have to scoop out sediment. Those sites need a lot of maintenance and annual inspections and all to function properly.
Oh, okay. And Phyllis says that some limited burning is done at the Art and Nature Park in Newfields. And
oh, good.
That's pretty urban as urban goes.
Yeah.
So one more question, and then I want to see if there are any more questions here before we leave tonight. You mentioned some of this already, but if someone has a favorite local park that they want to get involved in, they want to become a steward maybe, who do they want to contact in Marion County? Is that your department or is there
Yeah,
somebody else
yeah,
best?
and that would be me specifically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Do you
I would
mind
meet.
entering your contact information in the chat?
Yeah, I have it. I put it up on that last slide, but I don't know if people got that in time. So I'll type it in the chat.
Perfect. And anybody out there, if you're interested, please copy and paste that for future reference. Thank you,
And you
Jake.
can also email Indy Land Stewardship at indy.gov for
Okay.
any general inquiries or more information about the native planting program, if anyone locally would be interested in that. So I put those 2 email addresses on there.
Great. Excellent. And then I will ask Zach Day, our chapter president, who takes care of our registration, if he can send that out as well to those who registered. We are finding in these summer months that our turnout is a lot lower than our registration. So we are a bit behind on editing our video, as that we lost our video editor for these presentations. But I am going to try and train up myself and probably start from the latest and work back, because I know that we've had several more register than who make it, and I think it's these long summer days. So and this is just such a wealth of information. I'd love to get it out there and make sure that people have all those resources. Great presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's good to
Thank
be with
you.
you all tonight.
Before we say goodnight, does anybody else have any more questions for Jake while we have him here? He's a great resource and we should utilize him while we have him. I know it's getting late. I just want to make sure we didn't miss anybody. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Jake, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure and so informative. And I look forward to seeing you in the field one of these days.
Absolutely. You're very welcome, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Have a good night.
Take care.
Bye.